Welcome to Sons of Patriarchy. I'm your host, Peter Bell. Sons of Patriarchy exists to expose the hidden power structures behind Christian nationalism. Through survivor testimonies, shared storytelling, and honest expert critiques from across the political, theological, and cultural spectrums, we shine light on systems of abuse and authoritarian control principally focused on Doug Wilson of Moscow, Idaho, and the movements he has founded and influenced, as well as across Reformed and conservative churches. Our goal is not just to inform, how did we get here, and what do we do about it, but to spark meaningful conversations in homes, faith communities, and public spaces about what a healthier, freer, and more just society can look like. Together, we can dismantle harmful narratives and build communities of mutual respect and diversity. Sons of Patriarchy aims to do what Doug cannot. We will unite people. We do not demand you be like us. We meet you where you are. And while you may not always agree with us, we hope we can agree on this. Churches should be safe. You can find us on all podcasting platforms as well as YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, and sonsofpatriarchy.com. Ad-free episodes, bonus content, listening a week ahead of time on both audio and video, monthly Ask Us Anything specials, and many more perks are available across 5 membership levels at patreon.com/Sons of Patriarchy. Much of the same is available via Apple Podcast subscriptions for $4.99 a month. You can give to this work directly at donorbox.com/sons-of-patriarchy. Exclusive Sons of Patriarchy merch is available at sonsofpatriarchy.com/merch. If you'd like to get a hold of us, desire to interview either myself or co-producer Sarah Bader, or you're a news media agency looking for information on Christian nationalism, patriarchy, Doug Wilson, or anything else we covered in this series, go to sonsofpatriarchy.com/contact. Now, on to the episode. Welcome to The Moscow Mold, Abuse in the CREC, Part 6. In this episode, I spoke with Holly Rench, who has deep Moscow connections and a former member of Christ Church in Cary, North Carolina, Kathy, a former member of a CREC church in Oregon, and the Reynolds Family, former members of Trinity Covenant Church CREC in Santa Cruz, California. We begin with Holly Rench telling the story of what her daughter went through as a result of counseling with Doug Wilson and the strange practices of Christ Church CREC in Cary, North Carolina. Here is our interview in full. All right, so we got another guest coming on, and this one has some fairly deep connections into the Moscow crowd, but also has some stories and experiences of her own. So if you can introduce yourself and how you got into this Moscow mess in the first place.
Hi, Peter. My name is Holly Rench, and I think I have a kind of sort of well-known name in the Moscow area.
You do, yeah.
Those are family members on my husband's side of his brother Mike and his children and his wife Penny. They live in Moscow still, and so everyone, of course, if they probably heard of Gabe with his cross politic and all the things, and so that's our nephew. How did we get into the Moscow mess? Well, basically, I was raised in a Reconstructionist theonomic home. My dad loved Rushdoony. He was taught by Greg Bonson at Reformed Seminary. So I knew Greg, his wife Kathy at the time. Of course, we corresponded at one point. I met Rushdoony. I think I sent you a picture of us.
Yep, I got the picture. Yep.
Yeah, with him and that's his second wife.
Okay. Yep.
And I was really close with David Chilton. Now I wouldn't lump him in with this crowd because he actually had a big heart and he was a loving person. So I was raised in this culture. And so Like for my high school diploma, I had to read the book Theonomy by Greg Bonson and write a report on it. That was like my last thing I needed to do to graduate. So I did that, I guess, sort of. I don't remember. It was a very big book. I don't know. But
Yep.
So then I met my husband in Tyler, Texas, and that was a Reconstructionist church.
Yeah, that's a big hub. Tyler, Texas is like the other hub besides Moscow.
Right. That's where I got to know, Gary North and Sharon, his wife, and I had meals in their home, and they were at our wedding. So we were pretty entrenched, and we decided to go to seminary. My husband wanted to be a pastor, so we went to Reformed Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi. Yep. And he was passing by the magazine rack at some point at the seminary and saw a magazine called Antithesis. And it was a magazine that Doug Jones was putting out at the time. And I guess because we got on the mailing list, somehow one day, a magazine called Credenda Agenda arrived in our mailbox. And that was our first really introduction to Doug Wilson. And then there was a advertisement for a book he had just written called Reforming Marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So we got the book. We got all the books. And even though it's interesting, my marriage has never been one of lord over patriot. Like it's nothing like that. But we were, I think because of our history, we were drawn to just these like-minded people. And for myself, I wanted a prescription for how to raise kids that love God. Like I thought this was providing me with this prescription, do X, Y, Z, they'll turn out well. Well, that didn't happen.
Yeah. What I know, raising kids is kind of hard. So you want easier answers tend to be, you buy those off the rack.
Right. But when you're raised in this culture, everything's black and white.
Yeah, true.
There's no nuance. And so if you're not within the black and white, then you're out. You're not in the fold. So, so then we had kids and we started taking them to Monroe, Louisiana for the Confederate balls that Steve Wilkins' church would have. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, Confederate, I don't think I like that, but I didn't know why exactly.
Weren't they the bad guys in the Civil War?
Right. And so, but my kids loved to meet their friends. We were homeschooling. That's another thing is I had to homeschool because you can't put your kids in I would say public school. They use the word government school. Yep. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't afford Christian school. But listen, I was not the homeschool mother extraordinaire. Like I paid my kids to read. I didn't know. I was not that person. And so, but I tried. And so we would take our kids to these balls so that they would have some interaction with peers. And that part was sweet. But the last one we went to, I remember thinking, they always are surrounded a conference. And in the conference, we never went to the conference. But there were weird speakers. They were like Otto Scott. He was super racist person. He used the N-word when he preached. And the last time I went, there was a table of people selling their wares and they were Nazi swastikas and all this stuff. Oh, and I remember for me, that was it. I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. So we didn't go back. So we ended up moving to Modesto, California. We had some struggles with our oldest daughter who was 17 at the time. So what did we do? We went up to the mountain to the Pope. We took her to Doug Wilson for counsel. The three of us went to him for counsel. Mm-hmm. And his response was, you need to move her up here. So we literally moved our 17-year-old daughter alone to Moscow.
When was this again?
Let's see. Probably about 2001. It was 2001.
Okay, gotcha. Just I have the timeline in my brain, and people who are listening can track with this too.
So she met her husband, her future husband, there in Moscow, And they ended up moving to North Carolina, where we moved we opened a coffee business, and we wanted to be a part of the church plant, is Christ Church, Moscow plant in Cary, North Carolina. So we were there at the very first meeting in Larry Stevenson's basement in 2002. And so Gene Lichty came from Moscow to be the pastor, and we were told he was a successful model all over Europe. It wasn't until much later that we found out from his own mouth to our friends that he has an illegitimate son in Europe that he never saw or provided for, but he's counseling our daughter and son-in-law. And meanwhile, his wife is coming to me with her heartbreaking marriage problems with Gene. So you can't make this shit up. You just can't. So under the elders' leadership, that marriage did become abusive. And they would send Kelly Stevenson, Larry's wife, over to spy on our daughter to make sure she wasn't smoking a cigarette or drinking an alcoholic beverage or whatnot. And so we found out that every family in the church had a file. They had a file on us. So our daughter, Kat, there was a file on her, and I'm speaking with her name, with her full permission. She was not allowed to drink Diet Coke. This is all ecclesiastical file, okay? There was a sex calendar she had to keep so that her husband
from the church.
Yeah. So her husband wouldn't be manipulated.
Okay.
She ended up having it wasn't a physical affair, it was an emotional affair with a guy. And the elders wanted her to write down anything, all the details of any sexual discussion. So I have her file. I have a copy of it. So that's in there. The sexual details. I remember at the time going, that's creepy. That is so creepy. But, we were drinking the Kool-Aid, so we didn't fully get how creepy it was.
Sure.
She had to keep a calorie counter, write down everything she ate during the day. Because one thing with these elders is they didn't like fat women.
Okay.
And then she was only allowed to drink alcohol if her husband made the drink. This is from down on high now, okay? She was coerced into signing a document giving up custody of her children if she were to divorce her husband. It's in the file. So.
Sorry that I don't mean to laugh because this is funny.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's craziness.
So odd that a church is the one that has these files and is telling her what to do, what not to do, what to drink, what not to drink, how to often have sex. This is, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Well, and there's other things about the church that I remember thinking there's an elephant in the room. Does nobody see it? I don't understand. For example, they would pass out communion and they would hand it to the men only, and the men could decide who in his family could have it. So, like I said, I'm glad I didn't have a husband like that. For the head of household meetings, okay, this blows my mind. Head of household meetings were the requirement, and Peter, you can edit this if you want, but the requirement to be at a head of household meeting was a penis.
They said that.
No.
Okay.
But what they said was, they said was, if your 10-year-old son wants to come, he can come. If your 6-year-old son wants to come, he can. Any boy can be there.
As long as they're a man, you can go. Yeah.
Right. And so the women would be dismissed at the end of church to go eat cookies, but, don't eat too many. It could happen. So you had literally, I just think back now to the family dynamics of that. These young boys could go to these important meetings, but their own mother couldn't. And so it was just, as a woman, I just felt such, I've always been interested in theology. I read theology. I love talking about theology, but they wanted us to go talk about drapes, which drapes aren't bad, but it's not that important to me.
Yeah. Plus you got other interests besides drapes.
Yeah. So I just felt I felt oppressed. It was oppressive. And I didn't even really understand how oppressive it was at the time. There's a fixation, of course, on modesty. And then they would have this once a year, this lake day, like a Saturday at the lake. And so people are going to be in bathing suits. So it's like a huge issue all the time. So the women were supposed to hold their hands down to their side of their body, and whatever they were wearing at the lake had to come to the end of their fingertips.
Okay.
And then secondly, you had to stay together as a family. So kids couldn't go be with their friends. Like you had to like move around in a group as a family from one family to the other if you want to fellowship. I don't know. And kids were not allowed to hug. Even girls can't hug girls, like no hugging. And it's not acceptable. And, my kids were, they were big huggers. It didn't go over well. So they got in trouble a lot. One night, another of our kids, as a teenager, young teen, she snuck out one night to meet a boy down the road. And we found out, and I wrote to Jean and I said, I would really love it if y'all would help us with this, if you would talk to her and encourage her in doing the right things. And he agreed. And so we took her in there. It was the most horrific meeting. Only Larry spoke, Larry Stevenson. And he yelled and screamed at her and told her she was a goat that needed to get back in the pen. He told her to make a list of qualifications she wants in a young man, write them on a piece of paper, put them on the wall of her bedroom, and look at it every day and know she is not worthy of a guy like that. We were stunned. And I don't think Jean even spoke. And the other elder, John, who actually apologized to us for all this later, so I'm not even going to talk about him. I appreciate that. Yeah, and Larry, our kids were a little older than his mostly, and so our kids were acting out as teenagers, and they expected their kids to be perfect. And now he has a son in prison for heinous crimes.
Yep.
And I don't want to be like, F you, but I kind of do. But I don't want to hurt Kelly, the boy's mother. I don't want to hurt anybody. But I do feel like, it's just, it was so abusive, the situation. And because our kids weren't perfect, they hurt us so much. One time on a Sunday morning at church, Jean goes, "You're having trouble with two of your kids. What is going on at your house?" It's crushing to hear from your pastor. Especially when you're already worried about your kids, it gaslights you. It makes you think, well, what is going on at my house? What's wrong with us? So then, at some point, the elders brought charges against me. To this day, I do not know what the charges exactly were. But they brought charges against me that I had been a bad mother. On some level, that's something to do with the charges. I don't know. And
okay.
I ended up getting a bunch of old friends, people who'd known me well for 10, 20, even 25 years or longer, to write a letter to them on my behalf and say, this is not who she is. And they did that. And they came to my aid. And so they dropped the charges. But the damage was already done. They already had me thinking, maybe I was a bad mom, And so then when we finally got the courage to get the hell out of there, they gave us 2 weeks to join another church or be excommunicated. With all the, scripture verses about what's bound on earth is blah, blah, blah. I can't even quote it. But it's like, if we say you're excommunicated, you are literally outside of Christ. And at that point, I didn't believe that. I knew they were full of shit. But I love Jesus, and I, had been beaten down so much that you start to think, well, maybe he doesn't love me, And so a lot of pain, and it took us a lot of years to heal. And clearly I'm still not completely. That's our story.
Yeah. When did you realize, or what was that realization like? Because you were in this Reconstructionist, Theonomist, Christian nationalist, and hyper patriarchal society for a little bit. And for those who are listening, who maybe it's not as clear on their front end, or it's not as heavy, but they're starting to come to realize that they're starting to come to the realization, or they know of somebody who hasn't yet come to the realization. What was that like for you? That this is just kind of the church environment that you were in. You weren't necessarily raised in it, but like through your marriage and long portions of time in these kinds of churches. What helped you get out of this? Because if this is your environment, there's nothing else kind of telling you this is weird and wrong. What were the things that helped you in these times?
It was definitely a slow process, but I think one of the main things that helped me was to see the lives of these people who were saying they speak for God. I saw that they weren't who they purported themselves to be. They weren't. I expected some level of godliness, and it was more of looking a certain way. And those things, I think, are the first things I started to really pay attention to.
So some of this stuff happened to your daughter at the church, where they kept church files. And I can imagine somebody who's listening to this, like, well, it's only one case at this church. Like, it's not that bad. Like, it wasn't like they had files on everybody. But what did you see culturally at this church? Or is this just an isolated case where they zeroed in on one female and like she's got all the problems, and everybody else can look at the church like, yeah, one bad apple, but the rest of the church ain't too bad?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of stories. I hope some will reach out to you. Certainly don't want to tell their stories, but
of course,
there were people that went through even worse than we did, and we ended up kind of leaving the church altogether at the same time, and just started meeting together, like to just lick our wounds for a while. And our daughter, though, I do want to say, she was captive in this marriage and in this church where she couldn't make any decision on her own. As a full-grown adult with children, I would put it so far as to say she was in a prison. One of the things in her file is a letter that said to the elders saying, I cannot please my husband no matter what I do. I cannot please him. She just felt trapped, and she turned to drugs. And she's in very, very poor health and probably won't live very long. And she's only 39 years old. She made those choices herself. However, I think it contributed. I do. I think there's no doubt it contributed. I mean, I didn't turn to drugs, but I turned to alcohol. I mean, it was hard to bear the weight of that oppression. And I do think that they carry some of that blame for where her life ended up.
Yeah. How does a church come to start enforcing some of these things where they had the diet plan, don't drink Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi, whatever it was, or this is when you're supposed to have sex. How is that enforced? I mean, I know you've talked about some of the the things that they would talk about, at least sexually, with the emotional affair and what they wanted to get out of your daughter. But like, how is this stuff A, why does the church do this in the first place? And B, how does the church enforce these things on her members?
Yeah, there's fear tactics. We're going to take communion away from you. And for someone raised in the church, I mean, that's a horrible thought to have that taken from you. And then it's like shameful because everyone sees it. Everyone knows. And then the threat of excommunication. So you've probably heard of Mike Lawyer, who's passed now, but he was in Moscow. Kat and her husband ended up moving to Moscow. And Mike Lawyer, on his own, excommunicated her for getting her ears pierced without her husband's permission.
Okay.
And she wasn't even a member up there. She was still a member down here. So I'm not sure why he thought he was such a big man he could do that. I don't get it. But he wrote her a letter and said, consider yourself barred from the table, and then excommunicate, whatever. But that's a horrifying thing to a young girl who puts value in being at church and taking the Lord's Supper. And so, and then I told you that they used an elder's wife to spy on her and stuff. So,
yeah. So for those, this is we're trying to pitch this to those who are both interested in the CREC and those who are in the CREC and trying to get out. What would you say to the first group, those who are interested? They see maybe not necessarily the control. They don't see the control on the front end, but they see the obedient family. They see the obedient wife. They see the obedient kids. They see the strong man. And they're like, hey, I want those quote unquote traditional values. The only place I can find that takes a stand in our current cultural moment seems to be the CREC. They take all this stuff very seriously. They take the man's role in leadership very seriously. They take the woman's role of submission very seriously. They take the kids' role of obedience very seriously. Spanking, corporal punishment, whatever it is. And so they look at this kind of church and they say, I want that. I want that environment. I want that around us. Because it seems safe in what can seem like very confusing times culturally. Yeah. So what would you caution a family who sees that now that you've been inside of it?
I would say run like hell, first of all. Secondly, what you see on the outside is, I believe, a farce. It is not real. It's like that Jim Carrey movie where he's in that bubble world.
Show. Yep.
Yeah. And it's not real. And I hope the women that are either thinking about their families moving up there, or women who are up there in that church, I hope that they listen to this, because I can tell you, I believe without a shadow of a doubt, they're cheering for you, Peter, to be doing this, because they are miserable. But they're putting on a good show, because if they don't, you get barred from the table, you excommunicate, you lose your community, you lose your friends. I lost almost all my friends. The ones that stayed back at that church, I lost them, because you can't leave. It's like the mafia. You can't leave. So I just would caution them to look for kindness in people, not theology that bites back. Look for people that love their neighbor, who love the outcast, who follow the actual ways of Jesus, who would be called woke today. I mean, you can't go wrong with following him, but let's not follow a man who thinks he's all that in a sweater vest. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Agreed. And so second group, those, like you just said, those who were stuck, from those who were questioning to those who now realize that they're stuck, and they think, Holly got out. I don't know if I can get out. I don't know what this looks like. I don't know where to go. I don't know who to talk to. Like you said, all my life is intertwined here. My husband's business, or kids, the kids' school, my friends. They're trying to figure out how do I get out. So, what advice does Holly have for those who are thinking?
First, I'd say you can do hard things. You can. And what is happening if you were to leave, if what's happening in that moment is not your entire future, try not to see it in terms of this is forever how it's going to be. And then thirdly, think about, do you really want your children raised like this? Do you really want that for your kids? Do you really want your daughters to be suppressed, oppressed, sexually abused? And do you really want your sons to feel like they have that kind of control and power over women? And have courage, take courage. And if you need someone to call, I'm sure anyone from the podcast.
Yep, we got people.
Me? I mean, I'll take calls. I would love to help encourage someone to make a life for yourself where you're actually free in Christ. Free. Christ is freedom. Like, let's drop these chains.
Love it. So this is not a question, but it's what I ask everybody at the end. What does Holly herself want to leave listeners with? There is nothing out of bounds. There's no language out of bounds. There's no thoughts out of bounds. Whatever you want to say, any final thoughts, anything you want listeners who are either part of this or not part of this or not really sure about this stuff, anything at all that you want to leave today with.
I want to leave people with the understanding, the knowledge, and that they are beloved in Christ. They are loved. They are valued just as much as the man. They are made in God's image just as much as your husband. And for the men out there, you have value too. And you are taking advantage of it if you are in this system. And you are not following Christ if you're in this system, but you can turn from that. You can turn from that and do better. And more than anything, I would love for people to know that the love of God pursues you and is a beautiful thing. It is not this oppressive, nasty culture that you're in. It doesn't have to be this way.
Next, we move on to Kathy. Her story revolves around a CREC in Oregon, the life she was promised as long as she stayed a good and submissive wife, and the troubles she had in her marriage with the counseling her church provided. Here she is introducing herself.
Yeah, sure. I'm Kathy, and I was introduced into this world when my father went through a deconstruction in the 80s, came across covenantal theology. And by the time I was 15, he was ready to enter into that kind of church. And we found one that was nearby, within 30 minutes of our house. And that was my introduction to it. It actually wasn't part of the CREC because it was still, I don't even know if it had actually been founded at that point, but Doug Wilson's name was a name I had not heard, but it was floating around in the circles there. I actually have a background with the Bill Gothard Institute. I grew up with the homeschooling curriculum. I was in a lot of their programs. I went through their Children's Institute like 10 times. So that going into this church here seemed actually a lot more liberating based on the outward appearances of the Gothard circles I was in. And so there was a lot of attraction towards that. And the name that first time I remember seeing Doug Wilson's name was when we became part of the CREC, I think 2 or 3 years later. But it was already, they had already been using his teachings by that point. And then the following year, he actually came to our week-long family camp as the main speaker, and that's when I first really knew who he was. And he was a very jovial person. I liked his teachings. It made sense to me at the time. And so I kind of just took everything he was saying and swallowed it and started shaping my life. And everyone was kind of doing the same thing, it seemed like. So
now to set the scene, I asked Kathy about her involvement in the church. Was she bought in? Was she hesitant? What was her feel for the community? Here's what she said.
At the front end, I think we were seen as kind of a little off color because we didn't conform completely to their way. I think, and so there was a little bit of suspicion around us because, and I think that's the first early signs of not realizing how controlling the church was. It was like, oh, your kids don't sit still enough in church, and those sort of things, and so. We weren't trained well enough, I suppose. But overall, it seemed like, I was in a place where I really needed a lot of friends. I was 15, and this offered that. So I spent my time focusing on trying to break into the friendship group, and I struggled getting into that. They seemed all very friendly at first, and but I couldn't find my place, and there seemed to be not really a room to ask any questions about things, because I remember feeling very much like, how do you not know this already? It's just like, hey, what is this about? And it's just sort of that, like, how do you not know this? So there was a lot of struggle there. And I wouldn't say I was deeply involved, but I could tell that my father was really happy there. So this seemed like the church, it's not perfect. Nobody ever said it was perfect, but this was the closest that made him happy. And so I was like, okay, well, this must be the way, because I can see a lot of similar values to what Gothard was. And so that overlap there seemed to be where I landed and being like, okay, let's follow that path. And my dad seems to be very happy here. So I kept trying. Like I said, I just decided that this was the safe place to kind of learn and follow God. And so I was just absorbing everything. And I didn't really get terribly involved. I got involved with a few things, the Christmas program, a few things here and there. But it wasn't until about 6 years in, and that's when I started a relationship with one of the elder sons, and he would eventually become my husband.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's when things started. I started becoming a little bit more involved there.
It was at this church that she met her husband. In some ways, she chose him. In more ways, she was chosen for him. Here's what happened.
Well, again, like I said, we were kind of considered a bit of an off-color family, so courtship wasn't something that was going to be for us. All of my older brothers had dated, and but I knew about courtship through Gothard, and I could see that was something that was in this church as well. But this was the first generation coming up, and I couldn't tell if all the families were involved with courtship or not, if that was a big deal or the varying degrees of that. But at least and so I was kind of settled with, like, if I end up marrying someone here, the chances of wanting to do courtship might be high for that family. And I'm okay with going along with it for the sake of the relationship. It's not necessarily something that was expected of me by my family. And so that ended up being the case with my husband and my husband's family. And so he had a completely different plan. And I actually felt very protected from that in a lot of ways. I kind of appreciated it at the time. Now, I do see the controlling nature of it now, but his son was 19. I was 21, so I am a little bit older than him.
The elder son you're talking about.
Yes, yeah. So this was his oldest son. He was completely immersed with everything. He was thrown all kinds of Doug Wilson books to read. I still have his copy of Fidelity that his dad gave him to read at 16. It's underlined with notes from his dad on pay attention to this. It's quite an interesting artifact for me to have. And so, so his dad had basically, he orchestrated his whole life. This is how your life is going to be. So at 19, he said, okay, you have conducted yourself well enough. You have money in the bank. You have a job lined up. You're ready to go get your girl, go get married. So that's about the time that I came into his life. He was actually a friend of my brother's, and he took notice of me, and we had a mutual attraction towards each other. And that's sort of how things started with us. So then he went to his dad. His dad said, okay, well, her dad isn't into courtship, so I'm going to take over. So this is how it's going to go. And so he met with my parents. He brought out a whole big file. He had a plan. This is how it's going to go. This is what we want to do. And then he also had this whole thing of like why my husband was or boyfriend was ready to be married. Basically kind of his sales pitch on him, and like why to convince them of why he was a good fit for me. And so they really wanted it to go into a quick, short courtship, quick engagement, because he's ready to get married, and we don't want to hold that off for too long. And so despite us both being adults, they controlled the whole thing, and they told us, no, you need to. He still had one term of college left, and they said, you cannot be in a relationship with her until you have that term completed, and you guys can only talk at church and on the phone. And so we agreed to that. And he was even moved out of his house at the time. I still lived at home, but he wasn't moved out. He still agreed to it. And then right after that, so from October through December, and then December they met with my parents again. He said, okay, he's ready to date. He's ready to court her now. And then by February, he proposed to me. And then I wanted to get married in September. That had always been my dream. And so there was a little bit of a side eye at me for waiting that long, because, that wasn't, they didn't say too much about it, but I could feel a little bit of that like suspicion of like, why are you waiting this long? So, so most of our pre-marriage time was in an engaged state. So yeah, it's just, so it was very, very fast. There wasn't time to get to know each other really, other than what they told me he was. So.
As you're about to hear, things are great if you fit in, if you do what you're told. Your marriage will be blessed as long as you don't protest. Your life will be blessed as long as you stay quiet. You will flourish as long as your standards are set low. In other words, don't question anything. Fit the mold. Kathy explains what that looks like when she realized she didn't.
Well, that took a while. And it felt like right after we got married that things were being lived up to what was kind of set up for me. His stepmother, who was really my friend first, and she kind of took me in, mentored me. I admired her. I looked up to her, and she ended up she just ended up absorbing a lot of the responsibilities. I think she kind of was living up to the promise that was presented to me, that if things were off in my life, like, oh, my husband isn't living up to these things, I didn't notice as much because she kind of absorbed a lot of things. Like, for example, once we started having kids, I didn't notice him withdrawing as much because she was there to fill it in. And I just kind of took it in as like, oh, he's off at work. He's taking care of the things at work and she's here to fill it in. So a lot of the things that would have been red flags for other people, because I would have been like, hey, this is being implemented here, and I don't feel like this isn't working out the way they promised. Like it did work out the way they promised. It's just that he put herself in that spot to make it, because it's very much of making sure that her husband is uplifted, right? And so they need to make sure that he's the one that's glorified and things are living out for him. So
what did
he absorbed a lot of that.
I'm interested. You keep on saying what they promised. What did they promise? I'm curious.
Well, okay. So the promise to him, like I said, like they presented basically this shining, gleaming package of who their son was. And it was just like, he is someone who has worked very hard. He has kept himself pure. He's a man of integrity. He's a man of character. He is a leader. He will provide for you. It was just everything that you need to do. He's like everything that his role should be, he will fulfill. And so there was a lot of that like his character was vetted by them, basically. And so there wasn't any worry about, like, you're not going to have to worry about him. There isn't, like, he's going to be there to provide for you and you are going to be well cared for. And so again, when I said when we were first dating, even my stepmother for Christmas, she made me an album talking all about how all the things that he had completed in his life, all the work that his dad had poured into him. And then the second half was about like why I was so perfect for him. And so they gave me this great big album that was kind of their sales pitch that said like, we have grown this man and he's been waiting for you, and just step right in, and it's like,
Gotcha.
that was a hard to pass up.
Seriously. Yep.
Yeah. And so it's just been this like, we have been waiting for you to complete him.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, continue on with when things started, or what was that process like of when you first got married into when things started looking bad?
Things that it really didn't at all, because not, and so I in a lot of ways I've thought of myself as kind of almost like there's the mobster's daughter in a way. It's just like, she's just kind of going around. You don't know what the insidiousness that's going around that her dad does. You're just kind of like, oh, I'm living life and I don't know what dad really does for a living. And it felt sort of like that. It's just like, it's not that I didn't notice a few things of like, especially with a lot of the wives getting excommunicated, of like, but the story was always the same. She went crazy, destroyed her family, and she's unrepentant, and now she's excommunicated. And so there was a lot of that going on. Come to find out, my father-in-law was a part of a lot of that. So I was like I said, there was that. My husband's stepmother was much more of that person to absorb it all, because she came in, she's like, don't worry about homeschooling, I'll homeschool for you. Don't worry about, I will set up a grandma day once a week so you can drop the kids off once a week. And so I kind of had it made in a lot of ways. So I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And so it really was like, I remember thinking like, I don't know what these other women's problems are, the ones that were getting excommunicated, and like, just follow the rules and it'll work out.
There must have been something really bad for them to get excommunicated if this is how great life is.
Like, it's this rose-colored glasses optimism, maybe even a little arrogance and haughtiness in there of just being like, what's your problem? Just follow it. It's not that bad.
Just follow the rules and your life will go really well.
It'll work out. And it's never perfect. It's not like anything's perfect, but this is a good model. This is a good structure. This is working out the way it said it would. So, which is it's just really different than I'm hearing from other people's stories of saying like they kept inputting things and it's like, this isn't working. Where I was like, no, this is working. And so that's where I didn't really get that crack. And so as, the name Doug Wilson was starting to kind of come up again as sort of like what's going on in Moscow years later, especially with the Natalie Greenfield and that sort of thing. And so I remember just thinking, oh, well, maybe he's just, he just mishandled this one. Overall, he had that reputation that would cover over any mistakes he was going to make that was It was just like, he's just mishandling. Yeah, that's not good. He's just mishandled this case. That doesn't. And so that's kind of how I took it when I would hear those things. It was just a case by case basis, not that this was systemic and purposeful. Mm-hmm. So the point, so things were actually just fine. And then our church about 9 years ago, the church had their status quo kind of lifted, and the main pastor had left, ended up having to leave. And at that point, my husband and I decided to leave the church. I had never really found that community for me, other than like the friendships. I'd never quite broken into that friendship community. And so I was ready to kind of move on to find deeper friendships to cultivate. Mm-hmm. And my husband left over, I think he was just upset, feeling betrayed that the way of life was not working out, I guess. And I'm not even quite sure, but we didn't leave over doctrinal issues at all. We still were completely bought in. Mm-hmm. But he was starting to get darker and darker in his personality. I began to notice that, but it was never targeted at me. At least it didn't feel like it was targeted at me. It felt more like this was issues with work, and sometimes his anger would come out on me, but it never seemed like I was the reason why. So while I did notice his personality starting to get darker, I took it as like issues with work. So I bring that up because as we left, and like I said, it wasn't over doctrinal issues or anything. We are still very involved. Our kids were going to the ACCS school that the church had started, or members of the church had started. It's not actually a church affiliated school. It's members of the church had started. And my family was still there. His family was still there. Parts of his family were still there. So we were still really connected, and the church, my dad became an elder. He helped find the new pastor to replace. And they kind of told us like, hey, you might want to give this guy a new try. We're different now. I'm going to check this guy out. We've kind of refreshed everything. And so, so we were like, okay, we'll give it a try, to see what's going on. Cause my kids wanted to go back, and my husband wanted to go back. So, I said, okay, well, let's go try it for 3 months. And 2 weeks in, we're not members. I want to, that it's important to note that right now we weren't members, but we decided to just give it a try. And so 2 weeks into that, that's when I, discovered that my husband had committed a treacherous, a treasonous act against us in our marriage. So, and that is when I was like, oh my goodness, he's been spending this year kind of being so angry at me for certain things. And this was never my fault. I can see that now. And so he went to the new pastor, told him what happened. And that pastor reached out to me, and he's just checking in on me, and he was very warm, very kind. And I was being received much differently than I was by the previous pastor. So I was like, oh, something is different about this guy. He seems to get this. He seems to understand. So he offered to counsel us. And I said, sure, why not? I'm in a traumatic state, and I'm not going to, and I'm trained to be like, you don't go to anywhere outside of your pastor anyway. Mm-hmm. So this guy seems to get it. So at first there was a lot of love bombing on my part, which I now realize was love bombing, but it was very much of this like, because my husband had said, oh, this was completely my fault. Everything that I did was all me. This wasn't her fault at all. So he basically would say, the pastor just kind of say, wow, Kathy, you are so righteous. And I don't know why he did this to you, because you're so beautiful. I don't know why he would do these things to you. And you are, the roles are reversed. Really, he should have been like Christ to you, but now you're like Christ to him. And then he would say things like, "Oh, did you hear that sermon? I wrote that sermon with you in mind." And it was, it was really weird. Or he's like, "You're like Phoebe," and so he was just like, and it was a lot. Like it was, so like I said, it was like, I see now, it was just
some things bombing. You don't say as a pastor.
Yeah, it was bizarre. And even at the time I was like, this is kind of suffocating here. And so, but I was in no position to this was the best help I could get. And they seemed to be on my side of things, understand exactly what I was going through. And, until they didn't, that's what I now learn now is like what the biblical counseling model is like. Hey, you only have so much time to work through it out. And now you need to be done and get back into your role. Right. And so if you're not forgiving, we're turning on you now. We're turning on you and you're the one who's actually in sin. So, they had even given me, my own personal counselor, and even though she was a biblical counsel also, she was saying their timeline that they're giving you is ridiculous. They shouldn't expect you to forgive this quickly.
So they gave you a timeline to forgive.
Well, yeah, it wasn't like they set it out, but it was sort of like on their own determination of like, okay, this is long enough. We've given you enough time. Sure. Now the language starts churning is what it is. You start to notice the language churn.
Yeah, so they didn't like, hey, you got 6 months, but the longer you were in counseling, like, you haven't forgiven yet. What's up?
Yeah, exactly it. And so, but it was very, I think the turning was very slow, so I didn't catch it right away. But I just noticed that the winds were changing slowly on me, and that it seemed like, okay, he's doing his part and fulfilling his role. But you're not being forgiving, and then they brought in my husband's stepmother in again, and like I said, she had been a mentor to me, and she even wrote me a long letter saying like how I need to be forgiving of him, and so. And I was just dumbfounded because I'm sitting there going like, I'm in traumatic shock. I don't understand what's happened. This person that you guys told me he was, or that I always believed he was, is not who he says he is. He hasn't even said sorry. He just said that he did it, and because what they see it is the confession. If I confessed, which is really means that it's not even a repentance. It's just an admission that he did it, So, True. And they even told me, he's probably going to do it again. So, so I don't know what. So what we're going to keep an eye on him to make sure. So that's our job. You need to let us do our job to keep an eye on him when he does it again. And so that's where things were going like, what am I getting in? What have I gotten myself into? Where am I? This is my world that I've known for, 15 years is married. I've been married for almost 15 years here. And like all of a sudden it's just like turned upside down.
And you follow the rules too. You follow what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get a certain kind of marriage out of this. And now everything's crumbling. And you're like, but I did everything I was supposed to do.
Right. And it looked like it was for a very long time. So that's the part that I feel like is a little different. Is like it wasn't noticeable to me right away. It was 15 years into this marriage of going like, well, I thought everything was fine. This all made sense to me. This looked like the way a marriage was supposed to look like, and it wasn't. And like, if that's what I thought, how come you guys aren't seeing that? Why aren't you guys just as shocked? Why are you getting on my case instead of being more upset at him? And so, but the first year of the counseling, it was clear that it's like they were coddling me in a lot of ways, and I felt like there's miscommunications. And I thought, well, we just have our wires crossed. And then a year into that, I saw on the church Facebook group page that we were going to become members. That my husband and I were going to become, and we're like.
Interesting.
I was like, I didn't say that we were getting, like, I don't know where you're getting. You never talked to us about this. And it was already made as a public announcement by the pastor who was counseling us that we were going to become members. And so I called him up. I said, what is this about? And he said, well, you guys were members, so we figured we'd grandfather you in. And so it's no big deal, right? And I was at the time, well, we don't really plan to go anywhere else. Our kids are happy here and we are getting counseling. So I wasn't suspicious, or I didn't think things were bad enough to be concerned. And so I was like, okay, I guess so. I guess we'll become members. And so, they have a whole big vow ceremony about the whole, and it's really public and you have to sign these papers. And he even laughs and says, this is your last chance to run away. If there's no turning back after this. And so the Sunday after we officially became members again, like my next counseling session, things completely turned on me. And I started getting emails, and he sent me, he's like, here's the scripture passage about, the servant who was given much and didn't forgive and stuff. And he said, you know why I sent that to you, Kathy? And I said, because you think that's me? And he says, yeah, that's you. You are not forgiving. And so that's what we're going to work on. What do you think of the idea of a ceremony? So that way we can write down all the offenses he's done and you can just burn it up and forgive it and move on. And he kept pushing on the ceremony. When are you ready for the ceremony? Let's do this ceremony. Let's do this ceremony. And so I just kept going like, what happened? I was blindsided. I've been spending more time trying to fight off of people demanding forgiveness that I haven't even had time to process what has happened to me, the betrayal. And so I just started withdrawing more and more, started ignoring him, the pastor, and finding excuses to skip out on counseling sessions and I knew that I had to look a certain way. Like I couldn't become angry anymore. I couldn't be I can have outbursts anymore. So I knew to kind of like look like I was more settled so that way he can get off of my case a bit more. So about 5 months into becoming new members, he's like, I think you're fine. We're going to be done with our counseling session. So I kind of lulled him into that. That summer, it wasn't just that I had been doing counseling sessions with him. He had also inserted himself in other areas in my life. So he asked us to co-lead the community group that he was heading up. And he also had offered to take on an advisory role in our business. So that way I could feel more alleviated. And so it was kind of this whole colluding and infiltrating of my life everywhere he could get himself into. And so by that fall, he called me into his office and asked me why I had been avoiding him. And our counseling sessions were always like private in his office with a closed door, which is just him and I, which is always was a little uncomfortable for me. I thought that was odd. But so anyway, he confronted me about that, saying why I had been avoiding him, and I kind of laid out all the things that I had been feeling towards, like especially at the beginning when it's like, hey, you even called me. He said, I felt really odd when you said that I was so beautiful. And he's like, oh no, I didn't mean it that way. I just meant your spirit was beautiful. And it's like that.
Sure.
And yeah. And so it was just, I felt, I just didn't buy it. And so, when I laid it all out, he said, well, I'm sorry for those things. And I said, well, I don't forgive you because I don't think you're actually sorry. And then his face just changed right in front of me. It just looked like a mask fell off of him. And he just went, well, you sinned against the church. And to this day, I still have no idea what he means by that. I don't know. I don't know what the accusation was. And so then he just railed into other why he was right, but he never actually listed any offenses about what I've sinned against the church with. Just out of as far as I knew, it was out of nowhere. And so when I left that meeting, I left it on a place where I was like, let me get him thinking we're on good terms. And I left. And I left knowing that's it. I'm done. I'm never coming back. And so I sent him a letter right away saying, I wrote it out in a very kind way, thanking him for all the work and for, helping it out, but saying like, I need to be let go of my membership effective immediately. And he still such a new pastor. I think I got him just in time to where he didn't take it to the elder board. He didn't take it to the session to look it over, that he approved it right away. And I was able to get out right away. But I think he realized his mistake after that. And so I don't think he's done that to anyone since, but I was able to kind of just get out of the skin of my teeth of being released from the membership. They've been known to, excommunicate. So I knew that if I stayed any longer, I probably would have been excommunicated. And so it was just with leaving that, it was kind of like, then I was like, what just happened? I just left the world that I've known for the last 20 years. And I was on the excommunication table. At least I wasn't officially, but I knew I was heading towards that. And I'm like, I followed everything. And like, how did I end up here? So that's kind of where I started asking around. I had, and then so that's when I started realizing more and more about that's really. So then I started understanding more of the Wilson's system and just kind of how this was par for the course, really. And how common and normal it was. So, I mean, other parts about that were, our kids were still part of the school, and it was run by people that knew us, and I'm related to them in a roundabout way through marriage. And so when they saw that my kids' grades were slipping, they got on my case about like why this isn't working, rather than checking in to see like, how are you doing? There was no personal contact. It was just like, your kids aren't performing well. Even though we had a personal relationship with them, there was no checking in on that. It was just like, you're slipping as a parent at school. And we had a meeting with them telling them that, and they told us that we were being terrible parents and said that your kids are just too hard and you're not being good parents. And our kids have never had any behavioral issues at the school ever, and their grades were fine overall. And I mean, especially our oldest. And so the younger three, we pulled them out. Our oldest was wanted to stay one more year. And so we agreed to that. And she'd already been signed up and accepted for the following year. But they're like, well, you need to give us a plan on how you're going to help her for the next for the following year as she transitions into junior high. And I was in the middle of like, still, this is the same year of like leaving the church. What is happening to me? My life is falling apart. And we decided to move from our house. And so we're moving houses. And so they were like, where's our plan? Where's our plan? For 2 weeks, it was, you need to give us a plan. Then 2 weeks later, it's like, you didn't give us our plan. So your daughter's kicked out now. So it was, and she didn't have anything to do. So her grades were fine. And so there was nothing in the handbook that said that. And so it was weird how just all of a sudden it was everything that I knew that it was supposed to be about a personal relation, any personal relationship was out the window. It was just, they expelled her. They, we left the church. And then, when people started asking us why we left so suddenly, and we were saying like, hey, these are the things we're starting to notice about the church. Because at that time, my husband and I we came together. He realized like, oh, they're not treating you well. So there was kind of a teaming up again that I felt supported by him in this weird way. I think he was just feeling good about that. So, in that weird way. And I'm sorry, let me think about this here 1 second. Okay. So, we received a letter from the old pastor. He said, "Hey, we've been hearing things that you guys were not happy at the church, and we want you to come in for a meeting." And had we had known, it's like, we're not happy with the church. Had we had known that you weren't happy, we never would have let you go. You should come in for a meeting. And so he wrote it to me and to my husband and to the pastor of the church we were at. And we all agreed, it was like, we're not coming in. And so, then the two pastors kept coming. So the pastor of the CREC church who was counseling us kept hassling our new pastor, saying, like, you need to shepherd your flock. They're causing issues. And so he was going around and causing a lot of issues with me, saying that we were, sowing trouble and that sort of thing. So, basically I think we just quieted down after a while, and I need to take a breath here. I'm sorry. I think I'm talking. This is where I get stuck.
Yeah. Take your time.
All right. Am I on the right track with your question here?
I'm just
okay.
I take whatever you say, and then I filter it into the episodes. Yep.
Okay.
But I am tracking with you, and I'll help others track too.
Okay. So I'm trying to remember at this point. We were no longer at the school, and then we got him pulled out of we ended up, he wasn't a part of the business, and we were part of it, so we were just kind of left there now, being like, what happened? And that's when I started poking around more. Now that we had that safety, now that I had that distance of being like, what is going on? So then I really went and took a deep dive into what have I been involved in for the last 20 years. And so it's really been in the last 2 to 3 years that I've begun to piece together, like, really how insidious everything has been. And so I'm still at a point of discovery, of finding out more and more, and it's weird to point at Wilson right now, because I know there's a lot, he's responsible for a lot, but I just don't remember his name being thrown around as much. His books were thrown around, but his name wasn't necessarily thrown around as much. And so it's kind of weird to see that his influence seemed much more undercurrent. And that's where
it's there, even if it's not manifestly named, all the stuff you're talking about has happened to people at Christ Church under Doug Wilson, Doug Wilson's influence and authority. This is the model that they follow.
Yeah. And then whenever it's brought up, when his name is brought up, everyone is kind of like, well, we don't agree with everything he says. And it's like, well, I don't know anybody who agrees with everything another person says.
Mm-hmm. But that's also cover. If they say we don't agree with everything he says, it's a little bit of a cover saying, well, don't blame it on him. This is just us. But yeah, it's a way of like institutional covering for the person who's basically the head of the institution.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the question was like, how did the CREC happened about 5 years ago, but discovering it has been happening for the last 2 to 3 years of just understanding what it's been, and finding, and then kind of opening my eyes and seeing where he was there all along. And so I can look at old Facebook memories that come up, and my husband's stepmother put in, "Thank you, Nancy Wilson, for giving us this idea for how to handle Christmas well," and I think Nancy Wilson even like wrote the foreword of the my stepmother had built or stepmother-in-law had made a wedding planning book, and Nancy Wilson wrote the foreword for that. And so it's just like there was just so much influence there that I didn't realize, because the name that was passed around a lot more in my in-laws family was Peter Lightheart. They just love Peter Lightheart. And so that's why I was kind of like, well, Doug Wilson, he's brash and he kind of reminds me of my dad a little bit. And so there was, in his personality and I just liked the way that he preached. And so like, what he says is good. And so I didn't understand the system. I didn't understand. And really, roles made a lot of sense to me because coming from the Bill Gothard background, I understood that part. And the umbrella analogy wasn't there as much as the chain of command, and that chain of command made a lot of sense to me. And that's that militaristic language that Wilson likes, and so all of that stuff made sense. Like, yeah, that's order, and that feels right. And like I said, it felt like it was working out for me. So just keep things in that order. So
now that Kathy has gone through all this and is on the other side, what advice would she give others who are looking at this mold and thinking, well, maybe I can fit?
If you're looking to fit in, you may want to consider why you're expected to fit in. And what does that cost you to fit in? And really, what does that mean about them if you're needing to fit in? Ultimately, the only sin that is unforgivable here is the sin of not staying in your place. So once you decide that you can no longer stay in your place, you will be marked and you will never have that mark removed.
Okay. And then second group of people, those who were in your shoes right when things became clear or apparent to you that things were not going well, that following the system doesn't provide the results that you were promised. And they're trying to figure out, what do I do now? Everything is falling apart, just like everything was falling apart for you. What would you tell somebody who's now realizing like, this doesn't work?
I'd say that's right. It doesn't. I would want to validate them, and so let me think here. Can you rephrase that question for me real quick? I think here.
Yeah. So okay. Those who are in your position, maybe 15 years in marriage, whatever the position is, and then things start like they see it's about to crumble, and they're freaking out because they put so much into the system.
Yeah, I would say I am so sorry. I've been there. I know the depth of that betrayal and that pain and how disorienting everything is. And that I see you. I see what this is, and this doesn't have to be this way. I think I just have had someone see my pain and just get it and say like, here's what's happening to you. And I'm here to walk it with you, whatever it is you choose to do in this. I think that is the most helpful thing. Kind of have a little triage work done of being like, here I am. I don't know what's happening. And someone's saying, this is what's happening. And this is awful. What is happening to you is awful. And I think having validation right away of my experience is what helped wake me up as more and more. So it's because there was so much of denial of like, don't think about what you're experiencing, put it away and just move on, rather than acknowledging it and allowing your experience to help you navigate your situation.
Before we move on to our last story of the episode, Kathy shares some of her final thoughts.
Yeah, I think I would just, I just want to emphasize, just do your due diligence, see how this really manifests out. They promise you, these shiny, gleamy packages, life, like everybody's joyful, everybody's doing everything, but I think it's really important to go and check out the people who aren't there anymore and why. Find out why they're not there. and ask them why they left, and I think listen to the victims, because the victims aren't going to, they're the only ones that can tell you what it's really like.
Finally, for the Reynolds family. Another family, because there's more, with stories from the CREC in the Santa Cruz area. Let's get to know them.
Okay, I'll lead off for the family. Peter, my name is Jake Reynolds. I'm the husband and dad of a very large family. And we first landed at Trinity Covenant Church, Santa Cruz, California I think we visited July of 2009. We were on military orders to the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. And we had been in the habit of, moving I think by this time, on average, about every 3 years. So we had this crisis of belief, if you will, doctrinally a little bit. Every permanent change of station, military move, we had to find a new church. And what we had, and neither my wife nor I had grown up in a church-going family. So we were new to the Christian faith as of college, met, married, off into the Marine Corps together. And we just sort of grew doctrinally everywhere we went. And we had just, the tour previous to California, we had just landed in, I guess categorically, in the Reformed faith. That was all new to us. We had read Boyce's book on the doctrines of grace and Romans 9, just on my own study. It was a Reformed Baptist church. We found ourselves in Monterey, and we had kind of a crisis looking for a Reformed church. And we had friends that preceded us in Monterey, Marine Corps friends, and they had gone to what was originally and what became Trinity Covenant Church, and they recommended us there. So we visited, and I'd say Trinity was the first non-Baptist church we'd ever been to. And we had defaulted into evangelical Baptist churches before that in our many moves together. We really didn't understand the categories at that time. So I would say we were, maybe maximum 2 years into the Reformed faith when we visited Trinity Covenant Church, July of 2009. And that's my take on it.
There you go.
We had also read the book 9 Marks of a Healthy Church by Mark Deaver. And when we looked on the website, Trinity Covenant Church was listed as one of the healthy churches in the area. So we felt like it was a safe church to visit as well.
My name's Colby Reynolds. I'm the eldest child of the Reynolds family. I was 13 at the time of that Monterey move that my dad described. And later on, when I eventually moved back here on my own for work, I was 23 when I initiated my own membership at Trinity Covenant Church. And that was 4 years ago.
They are brand new to the Reformed faith, and they land at the CREC with a history. As you've heard in previous episodes, it's unfortunate when reputable ministries like 9 Marks recommend churches like Trinity Covenant. It can lead to stories like this. Those who trust those recommendations and get burned, abused, and mistreated. So here's Jake with a timeline of what happened to him, his wife, and his family at the church and the school associated with the church.
Question 0.1. Provide a short, concise summary of your dispute, your controversy with the TCC and St. Abe's community. Answer. We began a dispute with our church, Trinity Covenant Church, I'll call them TCC, and the school that came out of TCC, St. Abraham's Classical Academy. I'll just call it St. Abe's. Our dispute began approximately 5 years after our second membership at the church. So we got back to Santa Cruz as a family. the summer of 2016, and our dispute started in January of 2021 in the middle of COVID, when, as a school board member, I confronted my pastor, Troy Martin, who was also the school board chair for St. Abe's. So I was a school board member for St. Abe's. Troy was the school board chair. And simply put, Troy was attempting to, in my opinion, corruptly fire the headmaster, Devin O'Donnell, over their dispute in vendetta, because Devin had fired Troy's wife, Brittany, from the faculty because she refused to wear a mask while teaching class. So Troy attempted to coerce me to fire Devin while he pretended, or he claimed, recusal from the situation. I confronted Troy that this was a corrupt way of doing things. It lacked integrity, specifically Christian integrity, and I refused to do it. This minor dispute at the school lasted for 4 months. Eventually, I resigned from the school board because I didn't feel that the situation was resolved with any, again, Christian integrity. So I resigned from the St. Abe's school board in April 21, and specifically because the remaining school board members, Vince Paradiso and Abe Clark, refused to take any real action to stand up to Troy as well. And so anyway, I left the board, resigned in April 21. A few months later, August 21, my wife and I decided to disenroll our high school age kids from St. Abe's for the upcoming year. They'd been having trouble there for a while, and then the unresolved sin, as I saw it at the school board level, I lost trust in how the school was operating, particularly in the high school and at the leadership level. So we disenrolled our kids, and we enrolled them in the local public high school, Aptos High. Our church, TCC, was in the habit of praying for kids in school by name, homeschool, St. Abe's, New St. Andrews, what have you. And I decided to ask my elders at the time at TCC, Troy and Ron, to pray for our kids, 3 of our kids who were now enrolled at the local public high school, and to pray for them, and specifically for God-honoring friendships, opportunities for evangelism, and to link up with evangelistic clubs on campus, namely Fellowship of Christian Athletes, Christian Surfers, etc. They refused, the elders refused, Troy and Ron, and said that my wife and I were in sin for enrolling the kids in public school. I took issue with this. I called for a meeting with them, private meeting, still didn't resolve this, and I didn't understand their accusation of sin biblically. I then endeavored to write a statement to be read at the next head of household meeting in September, the following month. I raised my hand to speak my statement about this dispute with the elders and the inequity of corporate prayer for our kids versus other kids in the church over this public school matter and their accusation of sin. I raised my hand to speak. I was denied the opportunity to speak by the pastor, Troy. Raised my hand again to speak. He then dismissed me from the meeting. The following day, I received a letter from Troy and Ron restricting me from the Lord's table because I had attempted to speak at the head of household meeting. You're not allowed to speak up, is the bottom line. You're not allowed to freedom of conscience, and I was not allowed. And even though they didn't really know what I was going to talk about exactly. And so they disciplined me. They restricted me from the Lord's table, and I was under official church discipline for the first time in my life. I attempted, for the next 2 months, I attempted 2 very long letters to the elders as I prayed and considered, sought counsel over this issue of their discipline of me and their accusation of my defiance and leading my family astray. And during that time, I didn't come to the same conclusion that they did, and I began to understand that what they had done was abusive, that it was a weaponization of the Lord's table. And I really felt that, and this is what I confronted in these letters, is that all of this stemmed from Troy's earlier grudge against me from the school board issues. The fact that his wife was fired from the faculty. I, as a board member, had agreed with the headmaster along with the other board members that her termination needed to be upheld. But at the end of the day, I was the only one that maintained that position after his pressure, and which led to my resignation in the first place. Anyway, because I was the holdout, I felt that this was just a pastoral grudge against me, and tried to convince the other elder, Ron Myers, what was happening and that it was wrong, that it was simply abusive. Troy finally responded in November 21, very shortly, in a very short, curt response, that if I really had issue with the discipline, that I could take it to the regional presbytery, Enselm Presbytery, and the presiding minister, John Stuse. So I did. I wrote another letter to presbytery for Presbyterian oversight. The presiding minister, John Stuse, didn't really adjudicate clearly. He just suggested that we, as a family, move on to another church, and that the discipline would not be upheld. But the problem was, I had been on discipline for, I think, 4 months at this time, and I had asked for a clear resolution that if I was in sin, then the church should simply hold to my requirement of repentance. But if I didn't sin, then, there needed to be repentance from the pastor and the elder for wrongly restricting me from the table. That's a very tangible discipline that needed to be resolved. The presiding minister refused to do that. So there was another head of household meeting in February 2022. I was restricted from attending. At this head of household meeting, Troy and Ron provided a narrative, a false narrative of the dispute between us. And again, I wasn't there. I wasn't allowed attendance to defend myself. And they provided a largely false narrative. In fact, they didn't even mention the dispute at the school, nor my request for corporate prayer for our kids going on to public school. They simply made up some story about that I had wanted to raise a dispute with another member or a set of members at the church, and wanted to use the head of household meeting as the venue for this. And they knew that this wasn't the case. I think, and my theory is that they needed to give the congregation, the heads of household, some valid reason why I had been restricted from the table and why we were being run out of the church. This, in fact, worked because the presiding minister, John Stuse, along with Troy and Ron, wrote me a letter after this head of household meeting in February, stating that our membership was dismissed from Trinity Covenant Church. Effectively, we were excommunicated. Though they didn't use that word, we use that word, because I don't frankly know any other way to describe having been under church discipline by the Lord's table, and then later kicked out of church membership, and all under the accusation of defiance to authority. So once I received this membership dismissal, which was excommunication, though missing this firm declaration of the term, I went back to the presiding minister, John Stuse, and pretty much demanded firm adjudication as to the membership and the entire narrative, and the false narrative presented at the February head of household meeting. He simply responded with, you have been released as a member in good standing and not under church discipline. So just a complete contradiction and very discouraging. So my wife, Christy, in March of 2022, then wrote of the experience going through the Presbyterian appeal process and then being excommunicated, but without any firm adjudication and without even a public church trial, which we had asked for, but just essentially run out of church and then slandered behind her back. So she wrote of this awful experience on her Instagram account. Actually, she started a separate story. It's called Once Excommunicated. It is now public. Anyone can read it. It's a series of, 8 to 10 posts. She wrote of her experience on Instagram. And then the headmaster at St. Abe's, who was a CRECer, his name is Ben Alexander, he got wind of her Instagram posts and then discriminated against my wife. My wife had been the third grade teacher the previous 4 academic years at St. Abe's. We still believed in at least the lower school portion of St. Abe's and wanted to continue with our kids' enrollment there. And Christy wanted to continue employment as a third grade teacher. She loved her job, she loved her class. But she was refused a teacher contract for the upcoming year. We confronted the headmaster as to why Christy was not offered a contract and all the other faculty were offered contracts for the following year. And he, in no uncertain terms, said that Christy would be offered a contract if she pulled down her post on Instagram and repented of her very true account of what had happened. We were discouraged by this and a number of other things, which I will go into later regarding the board members, a private correspondence that was erroneously forwarded to me, where we got to hear and see for ourselves what the board members of the school thought of Christy in an attempt to trick her with an old contract or something. But they really didn't want her on the faculty anymore. So once my wife, Christy, understood that she was not wanted there, and after the discrimination and the earlier excommunication from the church, she was just done with it. Another group of parents who had been they had been part of St. Abe's for many years had grown very disenchanted with the, I would say, cult-like behavior and the very authoritarian nature of the TCC St. Abe's institution. They had been growing tired of it for years, and they had been wanting to start their own classical Christian academy. So they did in June of 2022. They essentially broke ground on a new classical Christian school here in Aptos, California. And they offered my wife a teaching contract for the following year because she hadn't been offered one at St. Abe's. So my wife accepted, and she's been part of CCA, Chrysostom Classical Academy, since June of 2022. So since that summer of 2022, we continued to receive private abuse, private, personal excommunication from our former church and school community, from a number of representatives, not necessarily inside the TCC church proper, as well. And so the slander continues, the scapegoating, because another school was started up, a competitor school to St. Abe's. I think that we were blamed for that unfairly, and a number of other things, even subtle threats. We've received subtle threats, and like I said, the personal excommunication, and it's just not Christ-like.
I've seen the comments on our social media, YouTube, and podcast channels. Why air this dirty laundry? Don't we have bigger fish to fry? What about the woke agenda? What about transing kids? What about men walking into women's bathrooms? What about abortion? This isn't a podcast about those issues. This is a podcast about abuse in conservative churches and Reformed churches in particular. Those churches that confess to be robustly biblical, solidly doctrinal, and proudly gospel-centered, of which I love all three. The Reynolds were left out to dry, mocked, scapegoated, and dragged through the mud. This is why they're going public. It's why they're publicizing their story, so it doesn't happen to you. Here's Jake again.
Question 0.2. Are there any ground rules, specific rules of engagement, as you talk about your experience at TCC and St. Abe's, or any other personal restrictions regarding the use of people's names, your own names? You're not claiming anonymity, and you're also using specific names of certain people. What are the ground rules there? Okay. Answer. I intend to use proper names of all those people involved who had a corporate or public leadership role, bottom line. So if somebody was a TCC elder, deacon, pastor on the St. Abe's board of directors, school administration, leadership, St. Abe's school headmaster, any public role like that, I'm going to use proper and personal names. All others, all of the personal names, church members, fellow school parents who did not hold a public office in the church or school, I'm going to keep their names anonymous. However, specific incidents, conversations, either verbal, text, email, phone, with these people who did not have leadership roles, I will share specific incidents, conversations, but I'll keep their names concealed. Okay, well, why use any names at all? That's usually a question that I get. And my answer is I'm holding these individuals publicly accountable for their actions and words since they assumed a public leadership role. This simply comes with the territory and leadership. You're held to a higher standard. You're held publicly responsible, specifically, and you give up the right to anonymity if you accept some sort of community public leadership role, bottom line. In comparison, I've maintained my own responsibility in word and deed through the entirety of this controversy. And I've told several people this. They are welcome to share anything that I've said, done, or written as it relates to this dispute, as long as it's true and as long as they bear true witness. So anything that I have shared or said, they're welcome to publicize it. They can put it anywhere and give it to the 5 o'clock news or put it on Facebook or Instagram. I stand by my words, and I'm simply holding them accountable and making them stand by their word. Okay, they're going to have to stand by their word in action, or if they choose not to, if they're embarrassed by it, or they're better yet, they're convicted by the Holy Spirit for what they've done, they're welcome to repent of it and make appropriate restitution. We stand ready to forgive them and to make good on a real Christian reconciliation. They just refuse to do that. And finally, as to why, in the first place, like why would I publicize their names? Why would I publicize any of this? It's really the answer is to prevent this community's abuse of people into the future. And to make reconciliation with those they have abused in the past. And now my own family, the Reynolds family specifically. If I give them anonymity, they will simply continue their systemic cycle of spiritual abuse by weaponizing church discipline, which is in fact meant for health in Christ's body. But they use it as a weapon. And so they weaponize church discipline. They'll continue to use public slander, gossip, threat, unless somebody holds them accountable. And that's what I'm doing. This is duty to Christ's bride, locally, regionally, here in Santa Cruz. Okay, and this needs to be stopped. They need to stop abusing people in the name of Christ. I'm also defending my family's good name in Christ. It's important for the truth to come out, who is responsible for what, and for the public slander to cease. Now, I'm not foolish. I know that people are going to think what they want. People are still going to talk. But we at least get to defend our name and to share our perspective, or from our perspective, what happened at the very least. And finally, my concern and the reason why I'm using proper names and why I'm publicizing who was involved is to help my kids understand what we experienced at TCC and St. Abe's is not Christian. It's demonic. And I'm countering their discouragement, for some of my older kids, they are discouraged in their faith. And to prevent my younger kids from being discouraged from faith or in their faith in Christ into the future. And I'm countering that by the truth and public accountability so that they can, again and into the future, trust the local church leadership at healthy churches and to trust Christ himself. Here's the thing. The gospel is, in fact, good news. And Christ is our Savior. And it's not the face of some of those specific wolves, dogs of this local community. And that's how Christ himself and the apostles write. That's how Christ describes those who abuse his bride. And that's how the apostle Paul wrote. He described them wolves and dogs. And this is clearly written this way in the New Testament about specific wolves and dogs within the church. And so that's the reason why I'm using specific names and why I'm publicizing our story at all.
Based on what we've heard, the timeline of events, and everything they've been through, what advice would some of the members of the Reynolds family give? Here's the father, mother, and eldest child.
I'll reserve mine for last. I think mine will be by far the least optimistic or flattering based on what I've been through personally with them. So I'll save mine. How about that?
Okay, Colby, I saw your mute thing go off. Let's go with you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick it off. For young adults, young men and young women looking to join the CREC Church and I guess Trinity Covenant Church in particular, a word of warning would just be to keep your ears open. Listen very explicitly to what it is that the small groups say, and as well as what the pastor says from the pulpit. Because while it may seem true and true to the Bible and biblically accurate and the right thing, while it may sound like the right thing, it's not. It's like a snake in a bush, right? It's got fangs, and it's going to it's going to be very vindictive of anybody who's not of the right opinion, of the right mind. If you don't think the right way, if you don't agree 100%, and if you're not the same, if you're not cut from the exact same cloth as they are, then you're not going to fit in. You're never going to fit in. So that's something I wish I would have realized earlier, and maybe I would have been a little bit more clued into what had really been going on. But yeah, that's my word of warning.
Gotcha. Christy, word of warning for those who are looking into this kind of community?
Yeah, people need to truly do their research. The CREC from my understanding, it's a very young denomination, and it's not healthy, and they're very misleading, and the women in the churches have to stay in their circles within the church, and the men are in their thing. I just would tell people to stay away. It's not healthy. And Jake and I, we have done so much reading, so much research, and we still scratch our heads like, how did we get here? How did we land here? And the community was beautiful, and it's everything we thought we wanted. But we didn't dig deep enough. And the little hints that we had to the Spirit in us that were giving us red flags, because there were those. We just didn't heed them because we loved what we saw. But it was too good to be true. It wasn't true. It was a lie, and a very damaging one. And we have a couple kids left in the aftermath of the legalism that was experienced at that school and at that church. Just stay away. Stay away. Do your research. Just know what you're getting into. That's what I would say.
All right. And then Jake, let's no holds barred. What do you got?
This particular, I can't speak for the rest of the CREC, though. Like Christy admonishes us to do our research. It seemed like this is widespread, which is why you and I are talking. But this local church, Trinity Covenant Church, is a cult. And if not a cult, they practice and they behave like a cult. And I've confronted them on this privately, meaning, not in a public forum. I've written them a letter and I've confronted them on my opinion right here. So this isn't something that I'm doing behind their back. I've confronted them on this, and they're dishonest. It starts at the pastor. It starts with the elder. It starts with the school board of directors and discriminating against my wife. And they took our excommunication and they applied that to her in a very ruthless manner at St. Abe's School. And they behaved like the perfect cult. I would warn people to stay away from Trinity Covenant Church. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. And what I've learned since is practice follows doctrine. I didn't, like we talked earlier, I hadn't internalized the law gospel distinction. Mm-hmm. I felt like, I understood, and I think I did understand sola fide, but I didn't have a clear internalized understanding of law gospel distinction. And that does not, they blur that down there. And they conflate, and you can see it in our case, they conflate faithfulness or works to faith. And it allows them to take what they understand as, faithfulness, which is loyalty to the localized pecking order of things. If you break that loyalism, that's grounds for dismissal, to run you out of the church, to bar you from the table. It's just that simple. And if you confront them on it, they won't be honest with you. I also think, and I've come to understand that when it comes to their doctrine, the danger here is that what they mean by faith alone is not what Luther meant. And it's not what the rest of the Reformed churches confess. And it's extremely dangerous. It's damaging to your kids who don't have a durable frame of faith, nor do the adults who need to find assurance in Christ and in assurance of the completed work that Christ has done in forgiveness of sins and in active obedience. The fact that they don't confess that and rightly think about that is it's heresy. And I think it just came out in practice in our case. It just took us a long time to realize what was happening.
To conclude, I asked Jake, Christy, and their eldest for some final thoughts. Each one is directed at a particular demographic, and I encourage you to take note.
I think that if someone is looking at classical schools, they need to know who's governing, who's on the board, what churches they're a part of. This school where I taught at St. Abraham's really was a church school, though we were told it was an ecumenical school. The people who ruled over the board happened to be the only two ruling elders that were at Trinity Covenant Church. So when I wasn't offered a contract to teach, and we were in a meeting to find out why, we were informed that the people who make the final decision are the two elders of Trinity Covenant Church. So it through and through, it's a church school. Yeah, it's got ACCS on it, but that also was founded by Doug Wilson, and that's not safe. It's just not safe. So steer clear.
I've got a final parting thought, Peter. I've taken a lot of heat up to this point for publicity, and I've been called to repentance by now just congregate members who are former friends, and they have called me to, you need to get control of your wife and have her pull down her once excommunicated Instagram, and it's only strengthened my resolve to encourage her to keep it going. Because I think this publicity thing it's a sham. It's vainglorious. And the reason why I'm willing to talk and the reason why I will continue to publicize what happened to us, it's not because we're victims. I don't think we were victims at all. I kind of think they're a little bit scared of us because we did speak up, and they're not used to people having spoken up. And I think the best defense is a great offense in this. And the reason why I'm willing to talk here on this platform and why I will continue to publicize what happened to us is in duty to Christ's bride. Just like you asked, I think people need to be warned of this particular local church. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. The second reason is to defend my family in the faith of Christ. To this date, I've yet to be confronted with any biblical sin, nor a family that deserved, one, for me to be barred from the Lord's table, nor to be dismissed from membership. And I've gone back to John Seuss, presiding minister at Anselm Presbytery, and I've asked them for a clear explanation. And his explanation was, you are released in good standing and under no discipline. That is completely contradictory. And it's just dishonest. And he never answered my question, which was, why were we dismissed from membership in the first place?
Yeah.
So I believe that we were excommunicated. So I'm publicizing this to defend my family's name in the faith of Christ. I think it's important to Colby and his siblings after him to understand what happened, and that, it's important for them to understand it so that they are not discouraged in the faith. And finally, this is a way for me to be rightfully angry about this situation out of Ephesians 4 and to not sin. I think there is a time where that statement that Paul writes in Ephesians is a commandment. Be angry. There are certain things that we should be angry about. And that would be the defense of the purity of the gospel. And by faith alone in Christ alone. Anyway, that's my parting thought.
I like
Thank
it.
you.
Colby, I don't know if you have a parting thought. If not, you are a prime candidate for most Series C churches and pastors. You're a young guy. When you came in, you were a preteen, teenager, and like a lot of young dudes are coming into this movement looking for direction and manlyhood or manhood, whatever it is. And so I think your demographic, because you're a little younger than I am, they're looking for leadership. Maybe even if you don't have parting thoughts, if you do, if you can add talking to the guys in your situation, younger guys who are looking for a solid church, looking for a guy to mentor them, and warning them about what they might see and hear in these churches.
I guess don't take anything without I guess a grain of salt. Don't believe everything you hear. Don't believe everything you see. Just because it's a seemingly awesome community with great open mics where you can espouse your opinion and make known what you have, grievance with or even agreement with. Just because a church community seemingly has all these wonderful things, like really, really, really dig in and find out what it is that they truly believe in, what it is that they truly espouse, what it is that they truly preach. Get to know what the actual community is, get to know what the actual final message is. And I think I said that earlier in my scathing review of Trinity Covenant Church and CREC and in my cautionary word, but I guess as a general message to guys who are my age and folks who are in my shoes who are looking for a home where they can be a future church leader and find the right home. Do your time, do your research, and know what it is that this potential home that you're looking at. Know what it is that know what it is that they preach. Know what it is that they espouse. Know what kind of a community that they're actually building. Is it one that's actually open? Is it one where Christ's word is actually being preached and followed? Is it a good, sound church, polity, government, doctrine? Do they preach good standards for modeling your lives after and modeling your families after? Is it a place where you want to start a family? Just consider and think about all those things before putting down roots.
I want to thank Holly Rench, Kathy, and the Reynolds family for their vulnerability and courage speaking out. You might enjoy listening to these episodes, and maybe your heart is broken. But each person who comes on faces significant risk for speaking out. I don't say that to burden you, but to give you some perspective. They speak out not because they have anything to gain, but because they've lost so much, and they hope that those listening can learn from what happened to them. May many heed their words. In part 7, we conclude profiling stories of abuse in the CREC. This doesn't mean we're done. It means we move on to the next denomination, which we will announce next Thursday. See you then.